Hello and welcome to Brandwidth. I am Manu Prasad, and since this is the very first episode, allow me to introduce myself and the podcast. I've been a marketeer for over 2 decades now, and the last dozen or so years have been with consumer tech startups like Myntra, Urban Ladder, and Scripbox, leading a bunch of folks who are collectively called the brand and marketing team, but who perform a variety of functions, from PR to performance marketing, from marketing automation to brand campaigns, and from social media content to retention strategies. All of these are important components of brand and marketing, and so are the people who manage them. So, Brandwidth is an exploration of brand and marketing principles, stories, and examples through the eyes of its practitioners. We talk to the entire ecosystem, from VCs who invest in brands to founders who are building a brand and business, and operators like CMOs, head of brand and marketing, or VPs, or even agency folks who live the brand on a daily basis. We talk to them about their perceptions of brand, their favorite marketing examples and stories, and any insights that they can give us on the nuts and bolts of marketing. So, introducing our very first guest, whose insights are proof that he is very aptly named, Gurudev Prasad, partner and co-founder of BusyBee Brands. Guru and I first met at Myntra back in 2012, when Guru had less grey hair and I had more hair. We've been in touch ever since, largely because I've been a keen follower of BusyBee Brands. What I love about their insights is that they're obvious on hindsight. But when you're hearing it for the first time inside that room where probably your boss is also there and most of your team, you can see the light bulbs go on top of everyone's heads. So, Guru, welcome to Brandwidth.
Thank you so much, Manu. Thanks a ton for inviting me.
All right. So, let's start from
I think there's a bit of a trivia that this is probably the first time I'm appearing on a podcast as a guest. I've hosted few.
Yeah, I know, because we've been on the other side at least once.
I'm also actually very nervous of how this will kind of pan out. But yeah, this is my first time as a guest. Yeah.
So, let's go straight deep into the water. Let's start from the very beginning to talk about your professional journey. So first of all, why didn't you follow the normal life cycle of Indian youth and do your engineering, finish your MBA, and then decide what you want to do? What's the story there?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. This whole idea that when I was growing up, the options were either you become an engineer or a doctor or maybe a chartered accountant. And there was an added burden on me because I come from a family where a lot of them are professors. And most of them have chosen not just to do engineering, but their MTechs and PhDs. And
research is perfect then.
Yeah. So I was like the black sheep. Probably I was the first among my cousins to choose like a bachelor's in business management and then went on to do my master's in communication. But I think what is important here is that I think around 7th or 8th standard, I remember seeing advertising. I was always fascinated with Bollywood. And once I saw it and I said that I didn't know that this was advertising or this is marketing, whatever. But I said that, if someone can do this and get paid, this is all I want to do in my life. Right. And that stuck. In all my naivety, I was like, this sounds so cool that they're making some fascinating, creative work, storytelling, and they get actually paid for it. And I want to figure out what is that and I want to do it. So very early on, I realized that I don't want to go and take that science route. I want to take this whole storytelling, marketing kind of route. And all my choices have been like that, right? I scored quite well in my 10th standard in science and maths, but decided to take commerce. Then decided to do bachelor's in management. Went to MICA later on. So I've always wanted to do this. And it's not very often that it happens. I speak to so many consumers, and so many young people every year, almost 1,000 of them, right? If you really look at it. I think it's not very often that it happens that you actually figure out what you want to do. And also it's not very often that it happens that your parents fully support it. Right? They never asked me a question and they were extremely supportive, even though they came from very simple background. They were very supportive. So I've been privileged in that way. Yes.
Great. So I think this entire conversation about advertising, liking it, and if somebody paid me to do it is probably a good segue into what I thought at that point in time was a very, very cool job done. Tell me a bit about the coolest job ever. a little bit of the background of it, because most people here probably are too young to have seen it or heard it, probably not, but a little bit of context to that and how it came about, because I was at the consumer end of it, or rather watching social media and saying this is a very cool thing to do. What is that all about?
So I think before we talk about the coolest job, let's talk about jobs in general, because a lot of young people will be kind of listening to this, right? I joined a design agency in 2004, spent like 1.5 years there, then another 1.5 years, consulting from an agency, working with an agency, then moved to the corporate side. Spent another 1.5 years there. So quick succession, I changed jobs. And eventually I landed up at SAB Miller, the company that used to sell beer. It got acquired by BNBev. And I spent 7 years there. So a lot of interesting lessons for me from this professional journey, and that I also kind of, a lot of people on LinkedIn reach out to me for mentoring advice. I keep telling them one is loyalty is highly overrated. A standard advice is that if you're in a job, early parts of your career, people will advise you don't change too soon and, be there. It will reflect badly on your resume. I think that's like really a lot of bullshit.
I agree.
You stay for a decent amount of time, a year or so, and you'll realize whether this is working out for you. Are you learning something new or not?
Correct.
And if it is not, you're not learning anything new, there's no value addition, and you feel like you're just like whiling away your time, please move. Thankfully, the whole definition of loyalty itself is changing. And, kids no longer are kind of held back saying that I've just spent this kind of time. So that's
in fact, the side hustle is a hustle now.
Absolutely. So that's one. The second, I think, important lesson for me is that you have to experience a bad boss to really value a good boss. When I moved to SAB Miller, I was blessed with bosses who were so giving and, kind of nurturing that I really value the difference that a good boss can make.
No, completely agree. I think in my case, I've taken good bosses for granted until I got a bad boss.
Absolutely.
So you kind of assume that the world is this way. All your managers are going to be super sweet, like this guy, help you grow, etc., etc., or her for that matter. I've had good women bosses also. And then suddenly you're hit with something and say, there's something like that in the universe also.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
And the third bit is that I think there's a misconception that you have to be working at a startup or you have to start on your own to be entrepreneurial. I think you don't have to be an entrepreneur to be entrepreneurial.
Oh, I agree.
Right. In SAB Miller, when I joined, we were given this freedom to kind of try out new stuff, experiment new stuff, and, run big campaigns, go out and work on new ideas and so on. And I learned so much. I don't think I've learned in any part of my education as much I've learned on the job. And I'm so thankful for that.
But I think, Guru, in let's say in the early 2000s or even until about 2010 or so, this entire idea of working in a startup was reasonably alien because there were no startups in the first place. I think I was a little fortunate that way because wherever I landed up, it was actually a startup, although you wouldn't say that way. For instance, WorldSpace was just getting onto its huge high trajectory. At midday, the launch was happening in Bangalore. Ditto for Bangalore Mirror. So I kind of got into places which had that entire startup vibe because you're doing it for the first time at that company or for that brand.
Absolutely.
But what you said is also true that there is a tremendous amount of learning that can also come from established brands which are doing a new thing.
A lot of learning.
Because there is also the established expertise of people who have been there and done that, probably mentoring you and helping you like a good manager. And that is probably, whereas in the other case, it could very probably be that every one of you are going up that steep learning curve together.
Yeah.
And that may or may not provide value depending on the individuals, the context, the company, all of that. So absolutely right. Yep.
A good job can really set you up for big things in life.
I agree.
Right? And I think it's underrated, a good job and a good boss, how important they can be. So coming back to coolest job, right? We were launching Miller High Life. An American lager in India, and the whole positioning was around embodiment of this American work-life balance, right?
All right, okay.
And we were very constrained on budgets, and we were given a challenge to launch this brand. So the idea was that we followed this approach called create, build, expand. So where you create the brand and appeal to a certain set of, if you can call them now, it's abused term, but influencers or real opinion leaders, and then they seed the brand for you.
Correct. There's a playbook of Tesla, for instance.
Yeah. So, and we did this in 2012 and we said that how do we really approach these guys? how do we create a hype even though we don't have the money to go mainstream and do big campaigns and so on? And of course, beer comes with its own, restrictions on how you can market. I think one of the biggest principles there is that constraints often lead to creativity.
I agree.
So when we worked under all these constraints, we said we have to think very differently. And the organization gave us a freedom to think very differently. So we conceived of this idea called the coolest job, which was more like a kind of a recruitment campaign saying that we are looking for a specific kind of person or few roles. You need to have a job and you need to love it, and we'll let you keep that job. And you have to then work with us freelance after job hours. And the things that you're required to do for us as a part of the job is to go to all the cool places, throw cool parties, hang out with cool people, get clicked by paparazzi and so on. And it's a 6-month contractual thing, and we pay you ₹1,00,000 to do this. Unheard of. Yeah,
I know. I was wondering what is happening here.
And the other thing is that we actually didn't disclose the brand.
The brand, exactly.
So we actually left it out, and people were wondering whether this is too good to be true. And they were searching on internet whether which brand is trying to do it. And we kind of knowingly left few, cues Easter there eggs. So that they could reach and figure out that this is Sab Miller and Miller High Life. And it was crazy. We, rather than publishing it in newspapers, we published in the job segments of the newspapers. We actually kind of went and posted it in all the B School alumni groups, right? I remember that I got a lot of awards for the best recruitment ad for that year. And the results were phenomenal because we got 38,000 applications.
I can imagine. Did you run this across the country, or was it to the top cities?
It was run across the metros, right? And that's where we were launching the brand because that was also a premium kind of work more brand. 38,000 applications we chose, and there were some, and online was not like so kind of well built out then.
Correct. Social media was early then.
So they had to do like some of these challenges of getting people to like and basic stuff. Then we chose the 50 odd people who were most active and could get all this, rally the support behind them. And also by nature, they were either DJs or, fashion models,
creative,
real creative and influencers of that time. So we flew, I think, the top 50 to Goa, gave them the best experience of their lifetime that money can't buy. And so irrespective of the fact that there were 4 winners, all 50 were almost converts of Miller High Life ambassadors. They loved the experience so much that they went back and kind of, stuck to us, endorsed us and all. And the 4 people who went on eventually to win and get this job, their job was to, of course, throw the parties and have good time and seed Miller among the right kind of people. Extremely successful for us. The brand really saw a kind of initial traction was unbelievable. And with the kind of money and constraints that we worked on, we won so much of PR, right? Unpaid
PR
media,
also.
this thing.
Yes.
I think an important thing that I have to tell you here is that it was not an original idea. Originality in marketing is overrated.
Yes.
I'll have to tell you, because I had heard about this idea because in Australia, I think they had done this whole idea called coolest job, where the job was to take care of an island.
I remember this.
Queensland. I'm forgetting exactly.
Right? I remember this.
So they had to take care of an island.
And that is a full-time job though.
That was a full-time job. Yes. And it was projected as the coolest job, right? So when we came across, and the agency also working with us, and we said that it's for an island in a different country. Why can't we do this in India for BIA and can really make this the coolest job? And so there's this beautiful book, like I think it's called Steal Like an Artist.
Basically, it's also about, I think, Genius Steals.
So we were inspired by that, incorporated a lot of things. It's not an original idea. And I see marketeers being caught up by this whole idea that, idea, is this original or not? Right. And what we have to realize is we are not creating campaigns and communication for the audience on LinkedIn or the marketing fraternity. You're creating for the consumers. So understand whether if something is working for the consumers and has a potential to create that kind of impact, please don't be shy of picking up something that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Right. I think that's one more lesson for a lot of marketers, But I think
where the marketers struggle is that their echo chamber is probably filled with people who are looking at ads and marketing guys per se. And there is really no context for them to say that, hey, I was inspired by this. I thought it was a great idea. And we could replicate this in a different way in this particular context. I don't think that conversation also happens, right?
Yeah, and because it's either social media now becoming like...
It's very binary, it's very polarized. You either copied or you didn't.
Yeah.
Right? And you have not given a hat tip, which is whole internet culture kind of thing, or you have not given a hat tip. And that completely takes away from, okay, so what have they actually created? And what is the context?
So I generally discount what marketers are thinking about my work. Because then you get into this whole ego thing of wanting to please them and win their accolades. I don't really care. I think what works, or what every marketer should really care about, is it working for the consumer or not?
Right? I completely agree.
And even for the consumer, I'm okay with the fact that either consumer loves me or they have a very polarizing reaction. But I think what marketers should be worried about is that consumer being indifferent
to this. Absolutely. Love me or hate me, spare me your indifference.
Yeah,
I agree. So speaking of consumer, and I'm going to probably zip forward a little bit. What made you move into consumer research and insights? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. Back in, let's say, the 2000s, when I was also part of focus groups and consumer conversations. And while I completely understood and accepted the idea that is probably where the foundations of a brand are built, I have to say that I used to get zoned out during research presentations because you had some 50, 100 slides of data and information, but really no point of view on where do you go from here. So that, to me, research then became a very dry thing, something that had to be done because, you had to do it, you had to understand the consumer, but nothing really exciting beyond that. What got you into insights?
There's a bit of thing that I've experienced as a kind of brand manager, custodian. I'll come to that. But I think my father was in bank. I changed cities every 3 years. I've grown up in cities like Kakinada, Vijayawada, then to Agra, Aligarh. So I'm generally, I think that's where I've picked up, you probably now in retrospect, I can call it marketing, but the whole curiosity and this understanding of, kind of humans and how they're different at the same time, they're very similar. Right. So the basic human traits are similar, but the expressions are different. And, so I think I'm extremely curious that way. Right. And every 3 years you have to quickly adapt to the place, make new friends and so on. That's one. I chose, I think, a part of my brand marketer's journey or this profession subconsciously because of that as well.
Right.
But more importantly, when I was a brand manager sitting in these research presentations, I felt like a lot of these research presentations are like newspapers.
Exactly.
They're good to read, but there's no actionability.
Yep.
And, I think I should also give this disclaimer that I've never been a guest on a podcast not because for the lack of invitations, but because I don't have an internal censor. So I actually
no filter.
I don't have a filter.
Very cool.
I cannot be politically correct.
Same here. So I think we'll get along fine.
My wife actually, she is in communication and she keeps telling me that.
But maybe I'll keep a buzzer or something every time you go and then a boom.
So, some of the stuff that I might be saying is, might not go down well, but I think I should anyway say it that. So it was like a newspaper, no actionability. A lot of researchers are like fence sitters. They'll tell you, boss, this is how it is. You decide. Now do what you want to do. And probably that's their job. I don't deny.
There is a level of objectivity there, but I think, and that's probably a function of having worked with BCB or seen it from the sidelines at least a couple of times, that the point of view is something that I've come to respect. Because if you're able to see it objectively and then give a point of view, I think that's very valuable.
True. So I was very frustrated with that because sometimes you want someone with a certain conviction to say, go this route. Yes. And that's what we do on BCB. We have a very strong point of view, right? And it's backed by research. Third is like a kind of an unpopular opinion, but I think qualitative research is highly plagued with professional respondents. Really, and I think the whole fake setup, calling people to a venue, showering camera in their face,
and then gifting them with something. It's like a template.
Gifting is still okay. Probably you're respecting. It's a token of appreciation for the time. But the other aspects of it, right? There's so much pressure on them to perform, the respondents, right?
And they're almost professional after a point.
They are that's why I said it's professional, because I started to see the same faces for different kinds of research. And I said, this is just not happening. So it came from a point of personal frustration and a passion point of just being curious and liking, I like the idea of talking to people and knowing them better. So that's essentially.
Somehow that never translates to research. So even if I'm commissioning a research and I have gone to these FGDs and I have gone to one-on-one interactions where I've been just an observer, right? Somehow I've always felt that never comes back onto that nuance and the texture of those entire discussions.
Yeah.
Somewhere never makes it to the actual deck in the end.
So that's one of the reasons why we don't do any research projects, just research projects. We only do strategy and inciting projects, saying that if you have a question or a strategic call that you need to take and you're kind of divided, I will use research as a tool, but give you a very clear answer on what you should do, right? And that's how we have never picked up any research projects, just pure research projects. It's mostly research that leads into taking you
actionable
taking
insight.
A few calls, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what we do. Yeah, that's how it has been.
So I think in that respect, from a curiosity point of view, as well as a business point of view, you've worked from edtech to fashion, chai to crypto.
Yes.
But what I've observed about you is that, and I think I've read that in your site as well, that you are the insurance for marketing investments. What is that approach?
Yeah. So one on the range bit, I think, we were very cautious of the fact that a new consultant is like a new pub in the town.
Okay. Explain.
Yeah. So for 6 months, they're celebrated, and the next one comes along and everybody goes to that, right? So, and thankfully we've been in business for 8 years, and we're
long-standing pub.
we're still doing okay for ourselves. And also we made things difficult for ourselves knowingly so that we are always ahead of the game. So for example, we only do one project at a time.
Yep. We don't
repeat categories. Yeah. We don't do retainers. Now we are running out of categories to work on, from cryptocurrency to chai to women's intimate, wellness to all edtech, all kinds of categories. Now we are really running out of categories.
But I think context changes. We'll speak about that in a bit. But yeah.
So that's another thing. So we don't repeat categories, don't do retainers, and we've made really, kind of on every project we pay someone very senior in the industry to come and work with us as a consultant.
Interesting.
So that person works with us as a devil's advocate, challenging
and
our
perspectives.
Things, right? So a lot of things that we've tried to make ourselves, not get into our kind of echo chamber or a comfortable place, right? The other thing about insurance against marketing investment is that if you look at any marketer's life, irrespective of whether they're traditional marketers, new age marketers, I think a lot of time is spent on the media optimization.
Right.
Should I do an IPL? Should I do a front page?
Things that you can very clearly measure at a given point and plan and controllable.
Not a lot of time goes into optimizing for the message, which is actually the
absolutely
important
with
one, right? And this is getting compounded because if you look at the startups, the agency relationships are not like they used to be in past.
Correct.
Every time there's a campaign, there's a new pitch. New agency, everything, right? So what is happening is every creative looks different. People don't realize, but even in communication, consistency and compounding works. So there needs to be a sense of fresh consistency where the core proposition is the same, but there's a fresh way to tell each time. Fevicol is a classic example, right? Fevicol, everybody knows what. So
make the familiar new and make the new familiar.
Absolutely.
I think that's I read it somewhere, but that was, I think, framed it correctly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what happens is, so every time you are optimizing on media, not on message. So what we try to do is also help you optimize on message. That's one. Also, a lot of this marketing behavior is very reactive. Competition ne ye kara hai, we'll also do it.
Completely agree.
Right?
Again.
If they've raised funds and they're going for IPL, we have to do something.
Correct.
So
they call it the cargo cult behavior. You basically see the externalities and then say, okay, let's do the same thing. So wear a turtleneck black and that's it, you're Apple now.
So what we try to do is to help organizations be more proactive in terms of their marketing. There's a beautiful quote in Alice in Wonderland. I think it says that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Right?
Yes.
So knowing where you are, knowing where you want to go and helping you get there. I think that's essentially what we try to help you as far as marketing is concerned. That's why we say that we are almost like an insurance against your marketing spends, right?
So I think a follow-up question to that is, since you did mention that about, actually then you're being paid a little bit for judgment as well, right? A point of view on a particular problem. So you have been now active for more than a decade and you have seen various kinds of CMOs, heads of brands, the people you are dealing with, or even founders for that matter, right? Is there a change in mindset that you have seen over a period of time, a new way to look at problems, or how they even look at research and insights as a function?
So I think, when I was starting, probably some of my bosses didn't want me to leave and they said that, aren't you too young to be a consultant? I'm 42 now, and often in a boardroom, I'm the oldest one standing. And
Ouch. Okay.
so the founding teams are becoming younger and younger, right? And
Yep.
that's one thing.
That's true.
The second thing, I think, if you look at the biggest change for me is that from 2014 onwards till now that I've started doing this full time, is that the founders and the really ones who are building meaningful businesses have started becoming conscious about building the brand from very early on in their journey.
That's good news. Yes.
Yes. So initially when we started, we were working with certain kind of organizations that are certain phase and certain funding and so on. But increasingly, we are working with very early stage organizations as well.
Okay.
Right. And they're not waiting for an accident to happen. Again, coming back to insurance bit, right? You don't take an insurance once the accident happens.
Correct.
You have to foolproof
It's insurance
it
for a
that,
reason.
Right?
Yeah.
So we recently worked with a solar energy brand called Solar Square, with really early stage. Or we worked with New Me, fast fashion brand.
Right.
In fact, these are still brands that have launched, but we worked with a brand which now recently with a brand called Appliance. They're building something really cool. It's a device that helps you cook even if you don't know anything to cook. So it's a very fascinating thing that they're building. They approached us when the product was at prototype level.
Very nice.
To actually make the product better.
Right.
Factoring in, the consumer insights from real usage.
That makes sense.
So we're seeing that the thinking of brand is not just fitting
it, or only for communication, but starts right from the product
so
itself.
They're starting really early.
But this is interesting because then you're actually even ensuring product market fit.
Absolutely.
Long before you actually, because otherwise what happens typically is that you have the product and then you look for market product fit.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, there's a market now. How do you push the product into it is the play. But this is entirely an interesting play. I hope more people go that way.
A lot of people, especially the ones who, as I said, are building something meaningful and are in this whole journey because of right reasons. Right. We've seen them thinking about brand first. The other big change, and which has nothing to do with consumers research or insight, is that after working with so many founders, I'm personally so like some of the products that they're building in India, which is not just about software, but software and hardware mix. I'm so proud of some of the things that are being built in India. Right, physical, tangible products, right?
And that the fact that you have a play in the narrative also, if you're going right from the product.
No, even some of them are not even my clients, and I'm a consumer admiring them, or someone who is enthusiastic for brands, admiring them from distance, right? Like Appliance is one of the products that is a phenomenal play between hardware, software. And it's a very tough challenge to crack, and to have that courage to take on that. Or for example, it's not a client, but I've always admired what Ather is doing with EV space.
Right.
So a lot of these brands building physical products with amazing software capabilities, I think, it's just amazing to see that such products are being built in India, not mindlessly. Right. You're not just trading in products, you're building something useful.
Which actually brings us to the other part of the equation, which is the consumer. Right. Yeah. So some would say that the human condition hasn't changed at all in decades, if not centuries. But then you've got the internet, social media, all of which probably creates an explosion of mimetic desire. Right. Once upon a time, to use a Luke Burgess, term, your friends and family were your models, right? The role models that you go after. But now it's all a Facebook, Instagram, and the internet in general, right? So it's almost as though Gram is fam. So everybody is a role model for you. What changes have you seen in the Indian consumer, let's say in the last decade or so?
Massive. And we work across categories, so across town classes, across age groups and so on. I think the biggest inflection point for all of us, and especially for the startup ecosystem, is the launch of Jio. And I tell this to so many founders that, if today we are operating and successful and at a scale, I think a lot of us have to thank Jio for being able to do that, honestly, right? You pick up a lot of categories and I can tell you Jio has been that big inflection point, right? So what has happened is this, what I call is that universality of desire.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Your frame of reference is not just your mohalle, your colony ka bhaiya or didi. Your frame of reference is someone of who is on Instagram or whatever.
The internet.
Yeah, so it's amazing to see that happen. And the whole idea of the coming up of the curve is happening so fast. I'll give an example. So we worked with you, I think in Scripbox, 2015, 16, I worked in finance, consulting a financial brand. I went out and we were talking to consumers and they were saying that, boss, I don't understand shares, I don't understand mutual funds. They're so
complex.
They're complex, they're fast, and I stick to FD. You went back in 2019 and 20 and the consumers are saying, boss, mutual funds are so slow.
Correct.
Talk to me about crypto. Talk to me about the latest things. That's Absolutely. The coming of the
That's
curve,
true. That's
right?
actually
That's
true.
happening. So a lot of these changes happening, and consumers also realizing that they have control over the brand. They're not helpless.
Consumers
are realizing, ki boss, if you're not delivering your part of the promise, I can go and kind of write about it on social media. I can give you a bad review and I know this will have an impact on you.
Or I can simply walk away from the brand.
It's a co-creation. It's no longer brand building is no longer just a prerogative of the brand marketer. Consumer has an equal say in the story now, literally, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these interesting things happening and, the changes are happening too fast. I think brands are not able to keep up with the pace. Right? The consumer is evolving a lot faster than the brands are.
Because organizations would pick up technology, whether it's internally or external manifestations of the brand, at a much slower pace. That probably moves at a, the other one is logarithmic and this one is probably,
True.
So I think consumers would pick up way faster.
Absolutely.
And probably expect brands to pick it up at the same pace, simply because, why aren't you using it, kind of a thing, as opposed to the other way. Yeah.
Third, I think one of the other important trends I've seen is that this whole idea of pride in nativity. Right. And we have to understand that the fact that I'll choose an Indian brand doesn't mean I'll choose something which is suboptimal in quality or whatever, right?
Yes.
But proudly, picking up Indian things and talking about it with a sense of pride, saying that this is made in India or this is an Indian brand. And they're also relaying that story to others in the group.
Yeah, I think that's also a nation growing up, national identity becoming a thing.
Yeah. There are many reasons to that. The whole idea of this whole D2C wave that's happening, the idea of, the pride in India as such, and, the narrative of the government and instilling this whole sense of pride and made in India. I think a lot of things that work. But I've seen, though the marketers should not confuse that just because I'm made in India, consumers will kind of give me a leeway.
No, I think the expectation is global standards.
Absolutely.
But I'm proud of the fact that I'm consuming something that was built in India, which preferably means that it's made for people like me. And therefore, it will be a good product.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just to get back to research, I've believed that research is usually about asking the right questions and trying to get a perfect answer. But I've also, to paraphrase Ronald Coase, seen that sometimes data is tortured enough to reveal things that you want,
it will give
you whatever answer you want, right? So in the kind of clients that you have dealt with, understanding or validation, what has been the play there?
No, I think any kind of research that you do, and when you play back to the founders, a large part of it has to be validating what they know. Otherwise, the founders are on a different planet altogether, right? Is
that stage play or is that actual reality?
No, it's actual, I'm saying. For example, if I come back and present to you stuff about your consumer, your category, and 80% of this stuff is like a revelation for you.
But it could happen, right?
It might happen, but it is definitely a warning sign, because you're then you are
delusional,
kind of clueless about what's happening.
Yes.
So I keep telling my clients that I don't have this burden to present new information to you. My thing is to present what the facts are or reality is. And a lot of it feels like, yes, we knew it, and I'm feeling reassured that this is validated. If a lot of my presentation feels like this is new, that I didn't know, then I think definitely there's something wrong in the way we're looking at the category and consumer, right?
Right.
Now, that's one thing. And the other important thing, and this is to do with the marketers, is that marketing for long has been hiding behind jargons and frameworks and all of that, right? A lot of founders today come from engineering background, very first principle kind of thinking and everything. So when you kind of really cut all this fat, all jargons,
clutter,
and explain everything in a commonsensical way, first principle way, they really like it.
You have a rationale based approach to explaining things as opposed to weaving a story, and
they buy into it, and that's the kind of repetitive feedback that we've got. I always tell, the agency people also that I work with, is that they might not know what you're doing, but they're very good at what they're doing, because that's their building business. And, you have to respect the man in the arena.
Yes.
Right? I respect the fact that you're good at what you do, but you have to respect that when I was a brand manager, that I am building,
Exactly.
I am also building a business here, right?
Yes.
And the marriage has to be of equals.
Yes.
So that's one. So talking about what is changing is also that though these founders come from exceptional pedigree and they are great at what they're building, what I've seen is that unlike in corporate houses where they're like, professionals with a certain experience come with this aura that I know everything. I have answers for all. I'm just there, Founders I've seen increasingly have that streak of curiosity saying that I don't know this and I'm really
There's an openness.
looking at you to help me understand this, at least as far as consumers is concerned. So that openness is really phenomenal. Yeah.
So let's talk about something that's, I think, dear to both of us, brand positioning. Where I'm coming from is that the customer is seeing an explosion of touch points. And again, probably an uncomfortable thing, but CMOs are practically through a revolving door every 2 campaigns or so, right? And increasingly, many categories are being pushed towards commoditization of their own interest or by the world at large. In all of this, do you think the consumer is following a long-form brand narrative at all? What do you think of this?
So I think if we go to the fundamentals, what is a brand? Brand is a shorthand for making a choice.
Right. It's a heuristic. Yes.
It's simple.
Yep.
So you stand for this thing. It has relevance for me. I'll pick you up.
Yes.
In a world where we are getting cluttered with choices and information, I think the shorthand for choices are even more important. Right? There's so many, like if you look at it actually, rather than it's an opportunity or it's even more relevant today. Or similarly, like there's so many touch points today for the brand that didn't exist before.
Sure.
And knowing the fact that consumer is information seeking, consumer is constantly searching about things, reading about reviews, and so reading reviews and so on. It actually provides an opportunity for the brand to feed or reinforce the proposition or the positioning again and again, right? So I personally think that positioning is not only important, it's even more important in today's time.
But the consumer is also choosy, right? Choosy in the sense that from a time perspective, I only have 24 hours in a day.
Yes.
And there are very specific things that I want to consume. It will not be possible for me to follow a grand narrative that your brand is following. That is where I was coming. For instance, something like moment marketing, right? A brand reacts to and like you said, how can you one up the competition in a single piece of communication? So is that mental availability for the customer, creating that mental availability for your brand in the consumer's mind makes you go along a ton of different paths, right? And it may be that you are not being true to your brand positioning at that point in time.
Yeah,
that is the part that I was speaking about. And after you give me an answer for that, probably I'll throw up an example for to get an idea of exactly where I'm going with this.
So I think positioning for me, it's not just about what you say, it's also about what you do.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you can say a lot of things,
right,
given the touch points and given how long you are in the play and everything. But essentially, when I experience you, what is that I get, right? For example,
what do you feel? Yes.
I intuitively go to Amazon to do my online shopping because I know that it will offer me the best choice and
wide price,
fastest deliveries.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
It's positioning, right?
Absolutely.
It might not be saying all of that in in that fashion, but
actually they did start saying it right from the beginning.
Exactly. Aur dikhao and aapki dukaan and all of that, right? So even the big brands, the platforms, I think are very subconsciously positioned seeding it. With the actions, not just by what they're saying, right? What is that when you use them, when you kind of consume them, what is that they're making you feel? I think that is what the positioning is. Unfortunately, a lot of us just confuse positioning with just the communication part of it.
I agree. Yeah. Every touch point and every experience shapes the brand story in the consumer's mind. I am a full believer in that, right? But even so, in the entire explosion of information and touch points in the consumer's mind, do you think it's possible for the brand to retain the sense of positioning across?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question because I'll just philosophically answer that. The fact that it's difficult is not an excuse not to do it.
Fair point. But I'm saying, are brands doing that?
It is very difficult right now to own a distinct positioning because just the surround sound is so much. But the brands that will stand out are the ones who will be able to do that. So for example, there's so many brands in healthy snacking as a space.
Yes.
You can't even count.
Yes.
Forget about remembering them. But then there is a brand like a Whole Truth that comes. And that takes
I think we are marketeers, so we probably think...
Yeah, that takes a very... No, I'm saying I have seen people who are really conscious about what they eat actually kind of showing Whole Truth, right? Carrying Whole Truth. So I'm saying... So you need to kind of brands that really are thinking sharp about it and delivering the moment of truth or giving you credible reasons to believe. I think they will stand out.
No, but I agree with you that it's an intensely difficult task because I'm looking at something as simple as a UX dark pattern, right? Save card or pay without saving card. Now, I don't want people to save my card. This is one bugbear of mine.
Yeah.
But you increasingly give me that button as the easiest to click, purely from a UX point of view, UI point of view, right? Even that small thing for me takes away a little bit of, like every interaction is a trust.
Absolutely.
You're building trust or you're breaking trust. Absolutely. In a small way. It may not break me away from the brand, but it does something. So I'll give you the example of Make My Trip, right? That famous ad that raised a lot of opinions on either side, right? So what is Make My Trip's positioning in your head? Forget what the brand actually does and all that. And what did that ad do to that positioning in your head?
So I am a loyalist of Make My Trip.
Okay.
Right? I don't use any other travel app for booking my tickets and all. Even though I might know, I know the fact that if I go to individual sites, I might get a better deal. I don't. And I might be an outlier because for me, the idea is the time and convenience.
I think you're the common. So I used to be a Clear Trip guy.
Okay. Yeah.
Simply because of UX and how they send my mails, all of that.
Trip for UI, UX or whatever.
All of that. And that is stuck.
I like Make My Trip just because of the fact that agar travel ka hai to Make My Trip pe rahega. It's almost like Amazon equivalent for me in travel is Make My Trip.
I think, again, an example, right? So earlier, I don't know how it is now. When I used to book and I used to do two people, Clear Trip always used to show me the full figure of both people. And I remember Make My Trip always used to do this one person and be like, oh, cheap. And then I'll say, oh, okay, final play. And it used to irritate the hell out of me. So things like that. But getting back to the ad.
I've not even gone to that comparison to know because I just found the fact that it's so easy. And I'm not an expert on UI or UX, but I find it reasonably easy to do.
No, I'm sure. Right? I think there are many. In fact, these days I'm not a loyalist. I also go to Make My Trip and say, okay, what's happening? Because I think what you said about earlier, right? That if it is in travel, it will be there. In fact, now I'm also into Book My Forex, which is also a Make My Trip company because I know that, okay, Make My Trip, I see that very clever adjacency is happening. So I'm becoming a believer of Make My Trip these days more than Clear Trip.
And there's also, I think, interesting to talk about inertia here. And it might not be relevant for everyone, but a lot of people it's relevant. For me, if the brand has not given a reason to complain,
I agree.
I don't go.
No, I'm that way. As well.
I don't want to kind of.
You have to really irritate me.
Yeah,
if you've done a
give
job,
me somehow I should feel like this is not fair or whatever, right? So in travel, except hotels, because I directly try to go to Taj and their website because I get a better deal, privilege, membership and so on. But otherwise, I generally go to Make My Trip and my search ends there.
So the ad did nothing to you?
Nothing. And actually, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about moment marketing.
Yes.
So there are times when I've hated moment, like some ads of brands, or there are times that I've loved some ads. So for example, I might not have liked Make My Trip personally, but that doesn't mean that I'll change my behavior or I'll stop using Make My Trip. I think we have to be very realistic about it. And there are times when I've loved an ad of a brand, moment marketing wise, and it doesn't mean I'll go and start using the brand.
Right.
So what we have to distinguish is between conversation and consumption.
Yep.
There are ads that can drive, or moment marketing is an example, but even communication can drive a lot of conversations and everybody in the marketing fraternity talks about it. I love it, all of that, but you will not go and buy it.
I agree.
And there are ads that might
even marketers won't buy it.
Marketers would buy it, right? And there are ads that won't drive conversations or virality, but they do something internally that they will really change your entrenched behaviors. They can. Potentially.
Yeah, so I think the sum of that is probably that there are many paths to God and each piece of communication does something or the other. And so long as it does that.
So driving conversations doesn't mean it drives consumption. And moment marketing is interesting to drive conversations, but I cannot really, from my personal perspective, I cannot think of many brands that they've kind of
shifted behavior.
Yeah, they've kind of really did a great moment marketing campaign and they also shifted my behavior. I cannot. Maybe
No, same here.
can
So I was
recall, but I
actually
cannot-
thinking about Make My Trip and saying that probably it is only an intellectual, sort of a feedback against the ad. The mass feedback will all probably be for the ad, was my reading of the entire thing. I didn't comment on it, but that was my reading, that the mass was like, haha, fun, and then move on in life.
And they don't even spend time. उनको क्या पता क्या moment marketing
Yeah,
है, क्या है.
absolutely. They don't really stack it. I keep saying that they're not seeing it as a performance marketing ad or a brand ad. It's a communication. It's
अच्छा
a touch
लगेगा तो
point.
पढ़ूंगा, नहीं अच्छा लगेगा
Exactly.
नहीं पढ़ूंगा.
Make me
दूसरी
click
बात,
or make me see.
मेक माई ट्रिप का ये भी है कि अगर मोमेंट मार्केटिंग का है कि यू हैव टू गेट द आईबॉल्स एंड गेट पीपल टू रिएक्ट, एज आई
That
सेड,
job is done.
either you hate it, love it, but don't be
Absolutely.
indifferent. I think they've done
That
the
job is
enough.
done. Absolutely. I think so. Ashish will be very happy with this, I think.
Yeah.
So, getting back to positioning, one of the things that I've heard you recommend multiple times in the past is brand purpose.
Yeah.
So, I have to admit, I completely got out of it when I saw I think it was a dishwashing gel or bar ladder itself up to self-actualization. So, I completely lost it. So between this entire play of brands trying to make themselves look good through blue washing or trying to make themselves look sustainable through greenwashing, now that Unilever is basically saying that not all brands need a purpose, has there been a shift in your thinking about what purpose should be, and are brands doing it correctly, or is it just a lot of lip sync?
I think that's the important thing, right? Because I am a very strong believer in purpose, of brands having a strong purpose, but not every brand should have a purpose. And more importantly, not every brand is poised enough to have a purpose, right?
Yeah.
Matlab, no matter how rude it sounds, but that's how it is.
No, I agree.
Right?
Either
If
you
you're
have the
a
context or not.
dishwasher brand,
Yeah, you
if you're
should
a
not.
hand sanitizer brand, matlab bahut mushkil hai.
There is a limit.
Yeah.
I think there's a Tom Fishburne cartoon which goes laddering up to world peace.
Yeah, exactly.
So now it's almost as though everybody's for world peace.
So let's deconstruct purpose a bit. What purpose is not is very important to understand.
Yes.
So purpose is not a tagline or communication. If you're a brand and you're trying to communicate your purpose, you lost it. Purpose in real sense is your reason to exist.
It's inherent.
Reason to exist, even
Yes.
if there was no money in it, if
Yes.
a purest definition, right? The other thing about purpose is that purpose is a manifesto for execution. If you are saying that this is my purpose and only way or only aspect of your brand that purpose figures out is in communication, I think it's completely wrong. And purpose has become fashionable now
It
and
is.
is abused. But I think the first organization that I can think of in terms of brand purpose in India at least is Tata. So Jamshedji Tata's stated purpose, I think late like 1860s or whatever, was that everything that the group does, we'll put the nation and community building at the center of everything that we do. Imagine that. And then from that lens, if you look at it, be it a steel factory, be it IASC, science, whatever, be it airlines, everything that they did was actually, or be it there, some of the, kind of probably the first organization to have a creche or a school for, kids of mothers who were working, and so many of these policies, HR policies and so on, because they really lived by it. And no matter that, even after so many years, it's probably one of the most trusted groups today, right? Another example I keep going back to is Airbnb, right? Earlier, Airbnb was seen as a cheap place to stay, an alternative to hotels. But they took a pause and they worked on this whole idea of, understanding the consumers' needs and so on. And their whole premise was that if people travel because they really want to experience the cultures, the people, the conversations, then more or less all these chained hotels are very insulated and give you a kind of a templated experience. How can you make people feel like they're not travelers but they can belong anywhere, right? And when you look at Airbnb, the beauty of Airbnb is that how they respond to an immigration crisis, right? Immigrant crisis, to how they, kind of relay a message about them having to cut jobs because of the pandemic. To how they're planning the kind of activities that you can do when you're staying in an Airbnb, right? How do they get you the taste of the local, flavor, culture, so on. I think it's so ingrained in what the organization does and why it exists. So purpose is extremely useful for brands that really can live by that purpose and demonstrate. It's not something that you show and tell. It's to do and demonstrate. purpose is not something that you communicate. If you have to communicate your purpose, then I think there's something definitely wrong with it.
Yeah.
Purpose is something that the consumers have to feel and experience.
I agree.
Right? And not every brand can actually espouse a purpose. So it's not just a fashionable. You have to, they're businesses of a certain nature, certain gravitas that can actually embark on this whole sense of purpose.
Got it. Oh, I agree with you.
You have to live by it.
You have to live by it. I think it's inherent in you in every, like I said, every touch point. Also, how you treat your employees, everything, right?
Absolutely.
Internally, externally, everywhere. If you're not confident of that, probably it's not a journey that you should get on.
And organizations, matlab, I don't like, the house of brands like the Unilevers and I personally don't even think that they are like geared to build purposeful brands. Honestly, no disrespect to anyone, but they're like marketing
from
machines.
A structure, from a structure point of view, and even from a, I mean, when you're saying all this, I was actually thinking about that. How difficult is it for a business these days to have a purpose?
One more important thing about purpose is that you don't have to be born purposeful. Airbnb is a classic example. It's not born purposeful. You can grow into it. Actually grow into it and grow into it very successfully and, truthfully.
But I think that also means that you're coming across it organically as opposed to force fitting a sort of purpose. Okay, come on, let's have a purpose and then start doing things around it.
If positioning was tough, purpose is 10x
It's even tougher. Absolutely agree. I agree.
So this is tougher. And we can only name few brands that are either positioned sharply or purposeful because it's tough.
Yes, absolutely. I think that makes sense. All right. So switching topics a little bit. So brands trying to be more human, but humans also trying to be brands.
Yeah.
Influencers. I think I read a recent report which said there are about 2.5 from nano to mega, and 2 million is nano, and then there is a smaller set that goes up right up until mega. So what is your take on these organisms? Have you come across them in research? What do consumers feel about them? Do they shift behavior? At what level of the funnel do they actually play a role?
So one of the important things about, like before I answer about influencers, that you asked me about how are the founders, changing. So one of the big changes I see is that a lot of founders wanting to curate a strong personal brand for themselves.
Be the face of the brand in that respect.
Be the face of the brand, or at least have a voice and, be that spokesperson of the brand and more thoughtfully. Right? And I think that's a good step.
That's a relatively new thing.
And I think in this domain, I think one of the best examples is Mamaearth. The whole premise of the brand is that we were not happy with what was available in terms of personal care for our kids, young children. And we created something that solves for it. And as young parents creating that, it gives you a lot of trust, right? That, if they've created it for their own child, I think with the best of the intentions, best of the ingredients, I can also trust it, right? And from baby care, they've moved it to entire family, skin, hair, everything. I think it's a phenomenal case study in itself of how beautifully they've built it.
Influencers,
yes. I think...
have you been influenced yet by somebody?
I did a podcast with Sai Ganesh from Dunzo at one point, and he said that, and very interesting quote, that there are more influencer marketing agencies in the country than there are influencers. Right?
Yes.
I was not a believer in influencers actually, right? So there are influencers who are stated influencers in my mind. I'm talking about as a consumer.
Yeah.
And there are influencers who are not trying to be influencers, but they influence me in a really big way. I think I have definitely considered, bought, consumed products because of people that I look up to, and they have been using, and they're influencers. They're not trying to be influencers, right? It's not even an endorsement. So I was a bit of a cynic, honestly. And as a marketer, I think you might believe in things, you might not believe in things, but what you cannot afford to be is not curious about things.
Yes.
It can be crypto, it can be influencer.
And also if it works and you still don't like it, you still have to work on it because it'll work for the mass.
So from a cynic, I've become a convert now.
Okay.
So there's a young fast fashion brand that I'm working with called New Me.
Okay.
They don't do any, above the line marketing, nothing.
Right.
And it's a fast fashion brand catering to girls from 18 to 24 years age group. Only do influencer marketing. A lot of collaborations with influencers, and not even the mega influencers. Influencers who are very stylish and like dressing up well, and
there's an actual categorization which goes from nano to meta, and there are two in between.
Written a paper on
mega.
This.
Yes.
Right? So they were using influencers and all, and I have honestly, I think what led to this transformation or conversion from being a cynic to convert is that you see a lot of this chatter online, but you don't see its impact in real world.
Real life, yeah.
So I'll tell you, last week there was this Black Friday sale that was happening, and they have 2 stores in Bangalore. One is in Orion Mall, where I stay, Rajajinagar, closer to where I stay. And the store is on 4th floor or the top floor. Nobody generally goes there, or by the time people reach there, they would have spent all their money on, there's a Zara and there are all these showrooms on the ground floor. On the Black Friday, just through the influencer buzz that was created on our Instagram channel, before the store opened, there was a queue of girls waiting outside. And the store was so crowded that there was a queue outside. Actually, the founders posted the pictures online as well. And I went to the store to witness this.
I think you shared something on LinkedIn as well, if I remember right.
Yeah, I went to the store just to witness it. And it was one of those experiences of what you do online actually reaps benefits in offline world in a store, right? And that was just phenomenal to see.
So is this a particular generation getting influenced, or is it a particular category or a combination of both?
So I was kind of coming to that. So they might be a thing that your influencers might work for frivolous categories or whatever, some categories, some age groups. From fast fashion, let's move to finance.
Finance, yes.
I've worked on finance. I'm working on something to do with finance for younger people today. And the influence of the influencers in finance is unbelievable. And to an extent, even scary.
Yes, I was about to say that. Thankfully, there is some regulation, but
to an extent, it's scary, and I think a lot more regulation should come and do it.
Yeah, because I've seen things that I would say, why isn't this guy in jail?
Absolutely.
For preaching this kind of nonsense.
But you cannot deny the fact that influencers have a major role to play in how they're shaping up, right? Whether it's good or bad is debatable.
You're making it sound like a necessary evil, in a brand's playbook.
Personally, for me, and for a category of people, the influencers always work. But for me, I might have been influenced by someone who is an influencer, but not wanting or not a paid professional influencer, right? A founder or some of these guys. So that's how. So
those are all models of behavior. I think forget models of behavior. Influencers that way have been superstars right from from my Bachchan days to.
If you will post on LinkedIn saying that I am liking this book, I will pick up that book immediately. You're not an influencer.
I'm not an influencer.
But I respect
thankfully.
you for your choices on what you probably read and all, right? So that is how it works. So this is here to stay. I think the interesting trend I've seen is that it's not just about the mega influencer, because what is also important here is to understand is that influencers started to work because of a sense of relatability.
Yes.
Yeah, stars की दुनिया तो बहुत अलग है, ये मेरे जैसा. But when they become mega influencers in a way that they almost become stars in their own domain or own, they've started coming in movies, doing big endorsement deals, there's a certain sense of suspicion that creeps in.
Yes.
So I think with example of Numi or some of the other brands that I've worked, I've seen that influencers were more relatable.
Again, it's a problem of scale.
Yeah.
Because
so you work with a lot
scale,
more of them.
Yes.
But they're not these mega influencers who have an opinion on everything from nutraceuticals to productivity.
And it makes sense from a business point of view that you're into fashion. And there is a set of relatable individuals who are also into fashion.
Travel, fashion, adjacencies. And look at influencers who have like 5,000 to 10,000, 15,000.
Exactly.
They work brilliantly well.
I think that's working even more now because... And we are all getting into our own silos of consumption as well. Like we have our favorite accounts that we follow and all of that. So that makes tremendous sense.
This play will be very strong. Influencers will become important, and it's not just about influencing them, launching their brands, and all of that will happen. And it's already happening in Western markets. So you'll see a lot of that happening.
Moving on from influencers to something that influences both of us, and you did bring it up. Books. What are probably 2-3 books that you would recommend this year, what you have really loved?
Yeah, so I, kind of made this New Year resolution a few years ago that I'll read a book a week. And thankfully, I think I'm more or less on that streak even now. So I don't read fiction at all, because I watch a lot of movies and, OTT. And I love that form of storytelling. And
I'm sure Morgan Housel will be there in your...
Yes. So I was just coming to that. So for my reading, because there's often too much choice. First thing I've done is I don't feel guilty of not completing a book now. I don't feel guilty of it.
I think I'm 50% there.
I don't know. I read a formula somewhere. I might have completely twisted it. But so for example, if I'm 42 years now I read 42 pages of a book, and if the book still doesn't hold my attention, I leave it.
It was almost like this finance my 100 minus your age is equal to...
That formula must have been like that, but I twisted it my own way. I said, okay, boss, it's other patience.
42 is a number, answer to universe and everything also. But,
I know, exactly. So I don't like, if I've invested that kind of time and I've not, I think the author has failed to really keep me interested.
Yeah, I think I'm still conflicted on that. So I keep feeling that, okay, I'm supposed to get it, I'm not. So I feel guilty about that.
So counterintuitive, but I think buying more books is the first step towards reading more books.
Okay.
Right? Some people might not agree, but I've seen.
What is that Sundoku? That I should never not have a book to read.
So I buy, like my weekend favorite activity is just to go to a bookstore. I go to either Sapna. Okay. Now there's a crossword in Orion or a land. That's all I want to do on a weekend is to go. It's almost like a ritual. I go there, I spend some time and pick up. And I've divided my reading into personal development and professional development.
Okay.
Professional development, anything to do with, I'm not a great fan of marketing books. A lot of them are very theoretical without actionability.
Behavior.
Yeah. So I generally kind of study consumer psychology, behavior, inciting, and so on. Or, business biographies, autobiographies, so whatever biographies. And on personal development, it's like a lot of things, right? From mental health to generally about health and productivity, habits. Now trying to read a lot about personal finance, investing, and so on. So I also believe that some books are worth rereading many times than just reading new books for the count of it.
Right.
So one book which had like a massive impact on the way I approach work is this book called Rework by the founders of Basecamp, if I'm not wrong. Right? Phenomenal book, easy read. You can pick up and read from any chapter, and it has played such a massive role in the way when I was starting on my own and wanting to be on my own, of how I wanted to work and live. One of the most influential books for me on personal finance has been Psychology of Money. In fact, I've just finished Same as Ever, which is the second book, and which is like really good. In fact, when you judge a director or author, always judge them by the second book or the second movie, because the first is always, it's brimming in their minds for decades and years, and it can be like really a magnum opus, but generally they lose their touch in the second one. Right? Classic example is I saw Animal yesterday, and I loved Arjun Reddy, and I was really looking forward to this, and I was so disappointed. So second book,
there are professional reviews for those influencers. Don't step into their toes.
So second movie, second book. So Morgan Housel is also, if you read his blog, one of the, he has this magical superpower in terms of how he articulates his thoughts.
Yes, framing is just phenomenal, good.
Right? Then James Clear, Atomic Habits, loved it, keep going back to it.
Right.
In fact, habit stacking is something I've started doing with podcasts, and we're talking about books, but podcasts are one of the most underrated ways to learn.
Yeah.
And there's some phenomenal podcasts on any topic that you pick up. So I only I give my permission to myself to listen to podcasts only when I'm walking. So I do this walk and podcast, and every day almost, it's a ritual. I look forward to that, walking alone with just a podcast. Then Naval Ravikant, I think almanac of Naval Ravikant. I'm not on any social media except LinkedIn, because too toxic, taking away too much of my time. But this whole almanac of Naval Ravikant is a great, it's a compilation of, I think, a lot of stuff that he said, written, whatever. I love it. And some very, very interesting things. You might not agree with it fully, but there's some great things. So a lot of these
He actually blocks people on Twitter if you disagree with him.
Okay.
No more navel gazing for you as the...
So one thing I keep going back to, I think, is not a book. It's not fair to call it a book, but something I think I'm just so fascinated, and so many interpretations, and I've still not got a full grasp of it, is Gita. I think it's probably the best manual for a life well lived.
Perfect. I'll introduce you to somebody.
So I just now I'm reading a children's edition that I got for my son. Anything on that, right? Either. And I've kind of, I also talk about it openly. I've had anxiety issues, panic issues, and some of this stuff around, stuff that I've read from Gita and on mental health and everything have really helped me to kind of understand and accept. I think acceptance is the first thing.
Yes.
Right. So on mental health, I've like...
It's also condensed wisdom of the ages and universal, therefore, and universal truth across time. And therefore, that is probably why I always get the feeling that you also take out things from the book that
you want to.
And based on your frame of mind, it's like not stepping into the river twice. It's not the same guy. Same way that if you read the same book or even watch the same movie at different ages of yours,
absolutely,
your takeout of that is probably different.
Absolutely. So I love reading. Still I'm not very happy with the kind of screen time that my phone tells me I'm spending on phone. So I want to replace a lot of with reading. Books. So I read both on Kindle and paperback. So I always carry my Kindle, and at night when I'm off, I switch off my phone and I'm off screens. I like physical books. So there's a role for both.
Okay. I'm still a book guy, as IKEA calls it. book. Yeah. Right. So last question, because we're running out of time as well. And no podcast, I think, is serious enough if it doesn't talk about AI. So humans, fundamentally, at least our generation, have moved on from searching for answers on the internet through Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine there was, to asking Alexa, and now to ChatGPT, right? From a broad perspective, whether it's a consumer thinking or an impact of brands, what's your really 30,000 feet answer or take on what AI is doing? And if you want research as well.
No, AI is kind of interesting, but before that, let's talk about Alexa. I'll tell you a beautiful story, and this happened. So Suharsh, who is my business partner, he, I think, lost someone in family, went to Lucknow. And, the person who passed away, his wife, and he told me the story. So he was sitting at their place and his wife is there, and she's really kind of sad, and suddenly she talks to Alexa and she says that वैसे तो वो जब थे तो आप तुम पूरे टाइम गाना गाती रहती थी, अब क्यों चुप हो गई? And I was like it just hit me so hard of what for us, I think it's a device, whatever voice, but it's almost like a personal connection. You know, when she's talking to आप क्यों चुप हो गई, वैसे तो पूरे टाइम उनके लिए उनके सामने गाना गाती रहती थी, is like how you're building a connection, how you're humanizing it. It's unbelievable.
You also see it in movies. I mean, they do it in Just probably, Alexa Beti and all.
Exactly.
But that relationship, because maybe it is because we are using speech, and we rarely talk to things. I mean, we talk to pets, we talk to plants sometimes also. But naturally, when you talk, it's usually to another human. And therefore, probably you automatically start anthropomorphizing it and saying that, okay, that's practically... And it speaks back.
I know kids who think of Alexa as their friend.
Yes.
So it's very powerful, right? I don't know from a business point of view how is it doing or whatever, but I think the connections it forms are really powerful, right? And this is one of the examples. On AI and chat, as I said, as a marketer, you have to be curious about things. I think it's your responsibility. So I have kind of looked at it, and my son uses it, by the way, for homework. He's 13-year-old, and the funniest incidents are actually told to me by Suharsh. So he was telling that in his daughter's school, and she's in 8th or something, there was an essay on the role of AI and whether how will it influence, and irrespective of whether someone wrote for it or against it, everybody wrote through ChatGPT.
Absolutely.
So imagine that. So you might like it, not like it. You will go towards it because anything that makes our life convenient helps us to be even more lazier.
Yes.
You will resort to it.
I agree.
Right? There's no denying it. And how will it evolve and the kind of impact it will have? I think it's stupid for us to be able to even guess. If I were to ask you when Facebook came across or was introduced as a social media, whatever, where you could see your friends or status message, did we even in our wildest imagination think that it will have impact on democracies and elections?
Absolutely.
Imagine that.
Yes.
तो AI कहाँ जाएगा और कितना हमें इम्पैक्ट करेगा, ये हम गेस करने लायक भी हमारी औकात नहीं है, honestly, right? But a word of caution here is that, we often as marketers keep saying this, that the attention spans are reducing, consumers long form नहीं चाहिए, short form reels and all of that. in all of this, what is happening is I also see, unfortunately, a lot of marketers kind of using chat GPT. You read a LinkedIn update and you see कि boss ये chat GPT से.
Well generated.
So you don't write for others. You actually write for yourself because it helps you. And that's the classic problem with a brief. You don't write agency brief just for the agency. You write it because you want clarity. It's your document.
Exactly.
So writing is the best form of learning for structuring your thoughts. It also shows you how clear you are in your thinking, right? Unfortunately, it will become a dying art.
Of course it will.
Right? You're already just restricted to writing this short whatever.
Exactly. But like you said, we are fundamentally lazy.
Absolutely.
And we'll do everything in our power to make our work life easier. And therefore, that's inevitable.
So I don't use ChatGPT personally to write any of this stuff. One of the toughest things I do is to write a weekly newsletter. And I don't even know what is the return on investment, though it goes to a fairly sizable audience, but I really don't know. But what I know is every time I write that edition, I feel I know the subject much better.
A little bit more, yes.
Yeah, it's very meditative as a process to me.
I'm completely with you. I think when you write, it crystallizes. Right. I think somebody read that when you read, you learn.
Absolutely.
When you write, you understand.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think that's a trick there.
That's the only word of caution I keep telling people, that in a world where everybody is leaning towards short form, chat GPT, AI generated content, the ability to write long form and put across your point of view in an articulate way, I think it's going to be a superpower.
Hope so.
Right. Yeah. So that's what it is.
All right. Thank you, Guru, for taking out the time and giving us a very insightful conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And absolute pleasure and all the best. I'm kind of looking forward to, interactions that you're going to have. Absolutely.
Super.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening or watching the podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe, or visit me at www.manuprasad.com.